I use a lot of lines in my work, I think because, well, my mother once told me, you use a lot of knives. Do you feel like you're in prison, in jail and trapped? And at that time I was a teenager. I was still using lines. When I look back at the lines, I think about the audiogram and I could see that my hearing would progressively go down. And I thought that lines give an order and information. They tell us that you sometimes have to contain yourselves, your emotions. You have to hold it in and calm down. My name is Rubbena Aurangzeb-Tariq, and that's my sign name. Why is that my sign name? Well, my name is because of my hair. In 2013, the portrait that I'd made at that time, when I look back at it, I think I should do a new one. And this was done in 2022. People make assumptions about who I am. I'm Muslim, I'm Asian, I'm a woman, I'm deaf, and I therefore should be at home looking after the children, cooking, looking after my husband. But I'm thinking, can't you see that I'm an artist? I'm a professional. Don't you see me? They don't know who I am, so I painted these works in response to that. I want to be heard. This is what I look like. This is me, Rubbena. She's a painter. Look at her. She's an artist. So I was doing a lot of self-reflection about my identity. And this piece here, my sign name, as I said before, is Rubbena. So I've shown my hair in that. And I've got this around my neck. Initially, I was going to frame it and I thought, oh, this is a very lonely figure. I want to show artists creating the art. So I drew myself again as two individual people creating a piece of art. And when I finished, I stood back and thought, this is very odd. It looks a bit like Mona Lisa. I thought that's funny. So I decided to entitle it Mona Rubbena. I'm now going to be Mona Rubbena in this. So another layer was to add the lines to it. Maybe the stripes, which have become a theme, are about order and control. There's still more work to be done with the stripes because she's still trapped. She's not yet free. It's a work in progress. So I grew up within a hearing family. My parents moved to England in 1960s from Pakistan. So my parents' first language is Urdu, Punjabi, not English. My children were born in Britain. When I went to school, my parents didn't know I was deaf when I started mainstream school. It wasn't until I was 7 years old that after seeing me regularly crying and having problems, my mum, without any acquisition of the English language, observed me in school, and another mother said, "What are you looking at your daughter for?" And she said, "My daughter's struggling and I don't know what to do." And there was a doctor that used to come to the school. And so a doctor came along and did an assessment, assessed me thinking I had a neurological problem, and then discovered that I was partially deaf and that I'd been born deaf, which was a massive shock to my parents. I moved to another mainstream school. However, this one had a deaf unit in it. We weren't allowed to use sign language. We had to be oral. It was an oral system, and that's what I grew up with. Well, after doing some research, they realized, my parents being first cousins, there was a genetic fault, and that was passed on to 1 in 4 children, and I was that one. So 1 in 4 would be disabled, and I was that one. So I have brothers and sisters. In my family, there are 4 children. My sister, a brother, another sister, oh no, that's me, I'm the 3rd one, and then another sister, younger sister. And I'm the only one that's deaf amongst my siblings, they're all hearing. This series of 5 pieces are entitled Don't You Dare, because growing up within my family, I was told often, don't you dare. I say, but I want to go and have a look at something over there, don't you dare, it's risky. If I wanted to go and explore something, they say it's dangerous, don't you dare. If I wanted to go and look at anything, they say, no, you're not going out, you're staying home. If you go to college, you come straight back. The frustrations within my family growing up were a repeated theme. And my family would make me frustrated and annoyed. I'd fall out with them for various things. I have 4 siblings. So this is a picture of mum, dad, and my 4 siblings. The others are with me in there somewhere. Sometimes I think that the behaviour might be fake. They weren't being their authentic self. And I'd say to them, you know, can you be honest? Others would say, it's not my problem, it's your problem. And I felt kind of like oppressed. They'd say, don't you dare, don't you dare. And I felt like I had to follow what was being told to me culturally. I had to toe the line, and I wanted to get out of it. It wasn't easy. I think I tried to include all of the family in the circle because of the sounds that I'd hear. You know, it's like the sign for sound is a circular motion around the ears. So I put them into circles. I didn't want it to be just a square. The circles mean it's no clear direction for me. It's just a circle going round and around in a circle with no clear direction and just repeated themes and being stuck. So some of them don't have circles because for me there was clarity then about who I am or not. Well, the British system is very different to here. So you go to college to do further education, a diploma. So I studied art, but that was still in a mainstream setting where I was oral and used hearing aids. I noticed that a lot of people at that time were wondering whether deaf people could actually do anything. They suggested I could just draw as a hobby and encouraged that because I was deaf. So they supported me to draw as a hobby. But my mother wanted me to learn English and maths. So that's why I went to college. But I did it along with art because I love drawing. So I always did art. And then I picked to do an art degree, which wasn't expected. I got offered a place at Central St. Martin's in London. They offered me a place, which was a shock to me. It's a very famous, prestigious university. And my parents became worried about me as a deaf person going off to uni. They wanted me to do university closer to home. And so my family home was in Surrey, but it meant moving to London. And my parents were a little bit anxious about that. And so I went to live with another Muslim family. They were incredibly strict, whereas my parents are not strict. And I struggled, and I had to bear with it and tolerate it. And then they wanted me home at 7. University finished at 6. And I would say, what about 9? And they said, no, 7. So I moved to London and lived with that family. 6 months later, I said to my parents, look, it's not the right place for me. They have 2 daughters and I'm a bad influence on their daughters. You know, I'm in the art scene, it's very open-minded. I said, I've got a group of new friends, they're international students. I want to live with them in central London next to the university. Please, 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 please. There was a lot of friction, arguing back and forth. They said, are you going to be safe there? I said, yes. And I went. Of course, they were anxious for a very long time. The previous family that I stayed with were upset, but I explained that it was really important for me to be with these students. And finally, I was free in my 2nd year onwards. Well, this is all in BSL across my chest. It spells Rubbena, and it spells art, A-R-T. So it represents me. So art for me, actually, was the start. I started off by copying. It was something I could do at home when I was bored, especially without language to communicate. I would just draw. My mother used to furnish me with paper. My family, at the time, I should give you context, owned a shop where they worked 7 days a week on a store. And I would cook, draw, cook and draw, and that's it. I would do cleaning as well. And then art, I realized, was for me, it became something I saw on TV. And my actual work was shown on TV. It had been shown on TV. And my parents, having seen that, thought, wow. I was also able to sell. People wanted to buy my work. And my parents thought, oh, okay then, we'll leave her to it. And they encouraged me from that point on and supported me. They were always anxious because the art world represented strange people, people that behaved differently to them and their culture, being Muslim, and they wondered whether I ought to be within that environment. And so I didn't want my parents to see that party inside of what I was doing. I just presented my artwork to them to give them confidence that I was still doing that. When I sought to drive independently, oh wow, you know, I found new friends. And then I actually moved to London and met other deaf people who were fluent in sign language. And I would speak back to them. And they would sign at me. And I would think, I have to speak. And they'd sign back. And I was like, please. And there was a clash of communication styles. And later on, I realized that I was wrong in trying to get them to speak back to me. But I grew in confidence with my sign language, which just makes me laugh looking back at the deaf people I met. But it gave me confidence to learn. It wasn't easy. So the other problem was that the deaf community rejected me. They didn't accept me straight away. I was rejected many times, which further diminished my confidence as a deaf person. And so I went back to mix with the international deaf students and tried going back to the British deaf community and saying, look, my identity is as a deaf person. And very slowly, little by little, they accepted me and I grew in confidence and stayed. But it wasn't an easy journey. The reason I decided to use charcoal is because when I started as an artist many, many moons ago, the first thing I used was charcoal. And I used it for years. For over 30 years, I didn't use it. And then during lockdown, I was doing a lot of abstract art and I thought, oh, can I go back to charcoal? And so during lockdown, I actually bought these large pieces of paper in 2014 and had planned to do it. But it wasn't until 2020 when lockdown emerged, I thought, right, I'm going to start using my charcoals again. It's very painful. I drew all of this. I used social media while I was drawing this to reach the deaf audience. And I thought, what are they trying to say on social media? I'm going to add this to my art. I really enjoyed it. And I continued to create a series of charcoal drawings. I made a film called Light Wave with the deaf community, talking about different issues linked to their current problems throughout lockdown. The lack of deaf education, their mental well-being, the British Sign Language Act, the frustrations around having interpreters mistranslate them, the Black Lives Matter movement emerging and the arguments around that. So there were many things that influenced me to create this. Those themes have all emerged in these charcoal series. And so I made a film. So the exhibition is entitled Matchlight. The reason why is because I wanted to focus on mental health and healing, the healing process through art. Matchlight is about identity, multiple identities, what we don't notice or recognize, what we misunderstand, how intersectionality is part of a person. So Matchlight shines a light on that, to recognize that. This is about my emotional well-being. It's about how interpreters voice over for me. And do they use the right emotional language to convey what I'm expressing? And sometimes I can lip read and I disagree. I'm thinking, why are they using that particular word? And it's about my frustrations with that not being represented. So I drew myself frustrated. And that's what this charcoal piece depicts. It's like, I don't care. It's saying, are you listening to me or not? Are you reading me or not? And it's all of my frustrations that I've put on there. So you can see all the words allude to that. So you can see that it's scored. And that's about my being angry and frustrated and annoyed. So that's why I expressed these strokes. Also, my long hair, I scratched it all out, all the way down, because I was angry. I used a rubber and scratched it all out, all the way down. So this particular piece is about networking. Printed copies have been put in deaf mental health services in the waiting area on the wall. So when families come and they're sitting in the waiting area, they can look at it and think about how they're going to support. So the family are there, and maybe the family don't all sign. Remember, a lot of deaf people are born to hearing families. So I wanted to make this like a Scrabble game. So these are the pieces to help the family with their sign language. This is work. This sign is work in BSL. This sign is support in BSL. So it helps the families to create ideas. It's food for thought and an activity they can do while sitting in the waiting area. This sign is guide, and so these signs they're all meaningful. Well, it depends on what you want to say. If you want to tell a story through sign language, these give them structure, a basic structure with the basic signs. If you want to just generally express, you use plain paper, but this is about giving conversation structure. It's like a guide for the viewer, the observer to read. They can read diagonal, up, vertical or horizontal, different ways. It's just to make them curious and interested in different narratives and storytelling. Which artist inspires me? It's a really good question. There are many I could name, but I have a lot of the Impressionists. So those Impressionist paintings, that era, I love the idea of the texture, the dots, the colors, the theory linked to colors, light and shade and dark. I'm inspired by colors because I believe that colors in themselves have a language. You don't necessarily need words. The colors project the emotions and the feelings. So most of all, it's the colors because they explain how one feels. So for me, colors are important. I don't have a specific style, motif. Actually, for me, what I really adore is the palettes. Using the palette knife, which is how I paint. Not with a brush. Generally, for a long time, I've used a knife because I like the texture and the shapes and the lines and the texture that I can create. With a brush, it tends to be flat, which I don't like. I like to have depth and texture. So for me, the knife is one of the things I identify as working with. For me, my creative ideas, they kind of naturally just pop up from everyday journeys, conversations I may have, information I've taken on board, things that I've seen in my travels, in my everyday life. It becomes part of my life and part of my life, and my art is inspired by that. My art, I look at journals. It's about the artist's life, what's happening in their lives, how they're inspired, who they're inspired by. Sometimes I get commissions, and so I have to do specific art looking at communities. So I have discussions with the deaf community who then inspire me, which translates into my artwork. So sometimes it's a theme that's given to me, or sometimes it's just through myself. So both ways. So planning my work in advance, most of the time, I think about the size. I decide whether I'm going to use paper, canvas, then I order the material, it arrives, and then I ponder some more. I sleep on it. I have all these colors that have appeared in my dream. I get those colors. I ponder some more, and then I start with a primer. I cover it with primer, and then I just go with the flow. Whatever comes to me, I add to the paper or canvas. Yes, so I have a series of paintings of hearing aids, because at that time I was inspired by music, how music sounds with hearing aids, and how you might dance to the music. But the motif was linked to me being born deaf, because my life, I must always have a hearing aid. Not just because I can hear, but because without it, I get tinnitus. Once I put the hearing aid on, I feel balanced out. Otherwise, I get a headache, so I must wear my hearing aids, bilateral hearing aids. I can't do without them. So since I've been wearing them, I've always had them on. If I try going without them, I just get a terrible headache. So for me, I need to have them. But at the same time, hearing aids allow me to maybe dance. And when I'm dancing, when I'm listening to music and I paint with the knife, I feel that the texture has added value. So if I hear noise, sometimes I get whistling in my hearing aids. And so that's represented in the artwork. I was commissioned to do this artwork, and when I received the commission, I was stuck, and sometimes that happens. I'm thinking, what do I do next? So that kind of frustration and angst means that I have to step back from that particular artwork and do something else, which makes me free and loose in my thinking. And I'm not in the frame, I'm free. So then I go back to painting the commission piece. So this helps me to get out of being stuck by doing something different. And I thought, actually, I can paint well. This is textured, it has lines. The self-portrait of me has limited colors. It was very hard for me to stick within that because I usually use lots of colors. But in that instance, felt I shouldn't. So I went to this, and it was an excuse to put in lots of colors into this, and then go back to doing my self-portrait. So it's a way of me controlling how I use color. In this, depicts the red chair that I sit on in my studio to ponder and sit with my thoughts. You can see this is very textured because of all of the neurons kicking off, because of all of my thoughts that come to me. But I sit down in my red chair and I'm muted. It helps me and gives me space to think. So these three, again, were a link to play. And it was an opportunity for me to use loads of colours. I thought, I haven't been using enough colour of late, so I used a lot of colour. This one is about hearing music, because I got my new hearing aid and I thought, wow, I can actually hear. And so this was me listening to music and painting. And there had been a project before with a deaf musician, and I had painted what they were doing. So I thought, this is another opportunity. I really enjoyed it. It was something different for me and quite playful. And I could feel the rhythm, which I hope is depicted in this work. Compared to this one, I was teaching online. It's an oil painting. I just put a lot of random colors down, and it was about the energy that I was feeling at the time, which I thought, right, I'm going to use that and transfer it into art. So it's quite a powerful piece. And also the texture here, you can see, is very texturized. And this also could become a bigger painting, but this helped me to think about using materials in a different way. And you can see the contrast with the colors, what stands out. I really love doing that because of the colors involved. Again, this art has glass in it, broken glass. And you can see, if you come closely, there are textures. You have to be careful not to hurt your fingers. Again, it's like dancing. It's a joke because I'm not a good dancer. I like to think I'm a good dancer, but I'm not. So this is like 3 feet. I've got 3 feet and I'm not a good dancer, but I'm grounded and I'm strong. So I was very excited to create this piece of work. This next piece, it's about people not being offended because it's obvious. People are often offended because of having a cochlear implant, being deaf, speech therapy, people saying, why are you speaking to me like that? So it's about deaf people being seen as stupid because they're using both hands. So all of those words that I'd taken on board from other people, I put that on this piece of work. People used to say, you should just speak. And it felt like I was going into a chasm, a dark hole, but yet I would come out of the dark hole in the chasm with the bright yellow. And that's why I don't worry about how many people criticize me or are likely to criticize me about having a cochlear implant. I've had hearing aids in the past, which always break, and people have said, why don't you get a cochlear implant? So I went through the assessment process, but through the assessment process, I discovered that I could get some brand new hearing aids, so I didn't need to use a cochlear implant, but we'll see how long that lasts. When I finished studying, I'm an artist, of course, obviously. Life was great, but the problem was I had no money. Yes. And so at the Deaf Club, a deaf man approached me and said, what are you doing here? I said, well, what am I going to do next? I don't know, sit back on my laurels. And he said, why don't you become an art therapist? Think about it. And I thought, what's that? So he said, why don't you go along to the hospital and visit and have a chat with the hearing art therapist there? I thought, well, there's no harm in that, why not? So I went along, and the woman said, you have to be committed to work every week with a deaf group. The deaf group, had serious mental health traumas. And they did a lot of art making. And the art making, plus the therapy, I thought, this is nice. I can do the same as this. And from her asking me to support her at Goldsmiths University, where I did the MA Art Therapy training, there had never before, I realised, been any deaf art therapist at that time in the UK. I was the very first. I had to start off with an interpreter, learning the jargon and the language, and at the same time I had to understand what the jargon meant, so I had to have additional training. It was a challenge, but luckily when I arrived, there was another deaf person there. I thought, there's one more deaf person there. Funny, 3 of us were studying at art school together, but we didn't know each other, and we didn't know that we were later to become art psychotherapists, and so we met all together in that place. Interesting question. Art therapy, when working with deaf individuals, they create artwork during the therapy session, and I assume they're going to create using hands, mouth and eyes, and it will be visual, but no. The artwork that they create mostly is linked to things to do with communication with people, communication with animals sometimes, which is a weird thing. But what's important to recognize is the colors that they tend to use and how they create the markings, whether they are really exaggerated lines done furiously. I asked them, what were you thinking of at the time that you did that marking? I said, well, you were scribbling away furiously. What were you thinking at that time? They then reflect upon what they were thinking about at that moment and then describe it. And so the energy in which the markings go onto the paper, it's mark making, it really is powerful. It's a powerful response because their physicality can show and convey how they're feeling. Sometimes it's more obvious. You can see why they've created, for example, bricks. It's about the barriers, the walls, the barriers that they face. I ask them to extrapolate upon that meaning. And it's how they overcome the barriers by going over the bricks or around the bricks. And that then helps them in the next step, in the next session. So art therapy works well for them in that sense. So this series was called Translating the Deaf Self. So in 2018, it should have been before that, in 2016, Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh and the interpreting department were looking at interpreters. But there was nothing in that about how deaf people felt about being interpreted. There was no research. So they asked Manchester University to be involved in 2018, and they asked artists to be involved to look at deaf people's well-being, how they felt about being interpreted. So following discussions with the deaf community, they asked me to lead this, by the way. There was another deaf artist in Scotland and one in Essex, and one in London and in Manchester. So they worked with the community in their locality and created artworks from those communities. And all together we gave an exhibition, a tour of all these spaces, and now an extra show for the deaf artist. The community that I worked with didn't have much English language. A lot of them were migrants to the UK, and they struggled because they had no language acquisition. They were always traumatized in their place of birth, their country of where they grew up, and punished for using sign language. And a lot of them would say they didn't know. So these lines here are about the small print in books where they can't read the words. The deaf people don't understand the language. They cannot read because they've had no language acquisition. So the lines are empty, but the words are in the background in opaque. So they're like a secret language. The aim was to make one large painting actually, but I had so many different stories. I thought it's impossible to put them in one painting. I can't mirror the narratives that I've learned. So I decided to make them individual. So for example, 20% of information is missed because of lip reading. So somebody would miss 80% of the conversation when they're lip reading. So that's what that denotes. And I felt that I couldn't contain, it didn't feel safe. So how do people translate me? It's like BSL is controlling them, because remember, most of them were migrants, and BSL was not even their first sign language. So usually these are exhibited in a myriad of ways, like a musical score. But because of this gallery's concern about people being neurodiverse, they've decided to group them in colours. So they've curated this part so the colours are grouped together. This installation was created for this exhibition. It's called Our Deaf Mental Health. And I set it up because in the deaf mental health services in the UK, there are 6 satellite services. There's 2 or 3 inpatient units, and there's also a deaf children only inpatient unit. So they are all treated for a period of 6 weeks or 3 months or a year even. It depends on their mental health assessments and diagnosis. Before the new building was established and opened, they asked me to work with the deaf mental health patients and have a discussion about what they missed about their home life, their food, their culture. Some of them said they missed their Irish food, some of them said they missed their Jamaican food. And so I listened to their stories and we created something to represent them. So I thought, why not use the Olympic logo as a theme and have the continents and their countries and their places that they call home within these paintings. So I said to them, what's important for you here in hospital? A lot of them said what's important was recovery. Some said they wanted to feel equal. Others said they wanted to improve. And others said they wanted to feel empowered. So their signs were put into these circles. I created that again here, that motif, but I made it a lot larger because I've got more space here to do so. And I've noticed that here, maybe the signs that are used here mean different things in ASL. I don't know whether it's mental health that's seen as positive or negative, the signs. But for me, I thought it was lovely to have those signs in here, and it's more space. So this denotes the living room area. So people are welcome to sit here, ponder the art, and look at the TV at the same time, because these are excerpts and clips of discussions that were broadcast linked to deaf mental health, and also deaf people being used as in-vision interpreters, where we talk about mental health issues and the different services linked to deaf people. So this is what we have here. There are captions that are shown on some of them, so people get a sense of what it's like to be deaf in the UK. In the hospital, there are glass panels to make it accessible so people can see through. But the bedroom art on the wall sometimes are flowers. And so I thought I'd do the same here. The flowers, actually, I copied from an American cafe that I saw locally. I put that on the wall. I copied it onto the wall. This is a chair, and this represents where the staff would sit in the corridors outside the patient's doors to make sure they were relaxed and calm, and it was the observation position of the staff. They also have some signs on the glass in the ward in the UK, and they are positive signs. This one says help. So if new staff arrive and they can't sign, they can see that the patients are doing this and they understand it means help. So it's to help and guide the hearing staff that cannot sign. They can understand perhaps what the patient is saying and support them. So it's a way of them signing to the staff. This one on the glass over here is about mindfulness. There's an orange piece of art outside the glass. It's not part of my artwork, it's not part of the installation, but I thought I would be creative and ask them to turn it around so you could see that somebody's gazing in through the window in the bed area and wondering about this. This hospital curtain I felt was important to show that there's privacy in the space. And also it's about the patient's recovery, creating a positive space. And I'm surprised to learn that in America, there are no specialist services for deaf people for their deaf mental health and recovery. There's nothing in America similar to what's in the UK. Yeah, so at the moment there seems to be a big gap. There aren't that many artists from an ethnic minority background. I'm hoping they're out there and I'll get to see them because I really want to encourage them to develop their career. We have a lot of stories to exchange. They're not alone. It's a tough journey, but we can get through it and it's not impossible.